الدولة الإسلامية.
ISIS declares an Islamic caliphate and calls on all factions worldwide to pledge their allegiance. Iraqi government troops continue their offensive to retake the city of Tikrit from Islamic State militants. And Hamas warns the Israelis that any attack on Gaza will open the gates of hell after 3 missing Zionist settlers are discovered dead in the West Bank. Hello there, you're watching Reality Tijah World News and I'm Fatima Basim. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, an al-Qaeda-affiliated group, has announced the formation of a caliphate headed by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Previously known as ISIS, the extremist group has dropped Iraq and Syria from its designation in a sign that the caliphate is no longer confined within the borders of these countries. Baghdad, for its part, said the move further highlights that extremists fighting on its territory are a threat to all countries.
قررت الدولة الإسلامية ممثلة بأهل الحل والعقد فيها من الأعيان والقادة والأمراء ومجلس الشورى إعلان قيام الخلافة الإسلامية.
The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria has announced the establishment of a caliphate that stretches from Iraq's Diyala province to Syria's Aleppo. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, the group's spokesperson, said that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria has been abbreviated to the Islamic State, indicating the so-called caliphate is seeking expansion beyond these territories. Baghdad condemned the announcement, warning that the message is a threat to all countries. Iraqi army spokesperson Qasim Atta stated, "This declaration is a message by Islamic State not only to Iraq or Syria, but to the region and the world. The message is that Islamic State has become a threat to all countries." ISIS has been fighting against the governments in Syria and Iraq for control over the historical land in a bid to restore the rule of the Caliph. Although it does not have full control of all of these provinces, what was previously known as ISIS is militarily present in most of these areas. Now their Islamic State allegedly extends from Diyala all the way to Aleppo.
The declaration of an Islamic Caliphate is suicide for ISIS at this time, since the Islamic world has rejected the militant group in their principles and in their practice. Even other extremist factions like Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and others rejected ISIS and its practices and consider it to be in violation of religion and Sharia.
As there is no caliphate without a caliph, the group declared its chief Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi a leader for Muslims everywhere. Al-Baghdadi is a 40-year-old Iraqi from Samarra who was designated an international terrorist in 2011. A video released by the group's social media wing has reportedly shown a captured Iraqi border post near Syria, as well as detained Iraqi soldiers. The extremists, speaking in the clip, vowed to break the Sykes-Picot border lines.
Under our feet right now. As Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi used to say, he's the breaker of barriers. Inshallah, we'll break the barrier of Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, all the countries, inshallah, until we reach Quds, inshallah.
The Iraqi people, however, have not heeded al-Baghdadi's calls to join his army of extremists.
They are disillusioned. Iraq has many sects and ethnic groups. Therefore, we, as Iraqis, we reject this speech and we neither recognize the Islamic State of Iraq nor the Pledge of Allegiance to the so-called Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
This is their dream, but they will never realize it, and Iraq will remain for the Iraqis, and there will be no more differentiation between Sunnis and Shiites. We are all Iraqis.
Members of the Islamic State have ruthlessly raped, slaughtered, executed and defiled Iraqis and Syrians, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, in the name of Islam for refusing to pledge allegiance to their extremist ideology. However, now with ISIS extending its authority, it seems that the atrocities it has committed are only the beginning of a far more gruesome fate.
Professor at the Lebanese University and a Mid-East affairs expert, Hussein Gharbiya, earlier said that the militants' declaration of an Islamic caliphate stems from the support by regional and global backers of the group.
This declaration is not far from the truth, in fact, because the declaration by the Baghdadi reflects the intention of such group to establish an Islamic State. Now, whether it's viable or not, this is a different issue. But it seems that the movement of Baghdadi itself is not self-created. It's not created by itself, but by support from different regions. So this declaration, in my opinion, it's very viable to achieve its goals, simply because there is the backing of these groups is regional and international. So whether they succeed or not to get the recognition by the international community, we have to wait and see. But until now, they are gaining ground. They have ground which is very rich in oil and fertile lands, with rich in water as well. Plus, it has the backing and the support of the Sunnis throughout the Arab world in general. So they do have a viable ground to establish their own state. When the war started in Syria, they couldn't achieve what they achieved in Iraq in such a short time. They have been fighting in Syria for over 3 years now, and the land ISIS got wasn't direct from the Syrian army, but from Jabhat al-Nusra and the Syrian Free Army. They established their control over the lands that was previously to these groups. But the speed which took control of such a large area in Iraq, it is astonishing and surprising at the same time. This wouldn't have happened if they haven't had the support from some regional power. And I believe that Turkey is the main culprit here. Let's not forget, only a while back they supported logistically these groups in northwest of Syria, in Kasab. So they are not Turkey and some Gulf states are very involved in supporting such group.
Meanwhile, the Iraqi military operation to retake the city of Tikrit from militants belonging to the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria has slowed down after 3 days of fierce clashes with the extremist group. The army offensive, however, has halted any further militant advances across Iraq.
The Iraqi army has pressed ahead with its operation to eradicate militants belonging to the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, despite the extremist group's declaration of an Islamic caliphate in 4 provinces stretching across Syria and Iraq. Following the gains made over the weekend, which saw the Iraqi security forces wrest control of most of the city of Tikrit from the hands of extremists, fighting is still ongoing in the suburbs of the capital of the central Salahuddin province. The military operation, which kicked off on Saturday, 18 days after losing control to the extremists, has resulted in the death of over 100 militants. As the Air Force takes the lead in the conflict to root out the Al-Qaeda offshoot. Aerial bombardments have also been conducted in the northern city of Mosul, the capital of Nineveh province. As of yet, the army has not undertaken ground operations to retake Iraq's second city. However, airstrikes have targeted militant hideouts and have maintained the Iraqi army's position around the province. At the same time, the armed forces have expanded their security ring around the capital Baghdad, taking a strategic bridge northeast of the capital along the way.
The ISIS terrorists have tried to capture this bridge so they can have easy access to Baghdad. This bridge is one of the most important routes to the suburbs of Baghdad.
The strategic importance of that bridge is directly linked to the fighting still ongoing in the Diyala province. The army has encountered fierce resistance from the extremists, but has been able to fend off all their attempts to advance into the capital or other cities in the region. The Iraqi army has recuperated its aerial losses in the battle against the spread of extremists. Now the establishment of an Islamic caliphate by the ruthless terrorist group will require a heightened response, despite the fact that so far regional countries and world powers have failed to respond to the extremist threat.
Let's get the latest on Iraq with our correspondent there. Mustafa, tell us more about the situation in Tikrit. Does the army have control of the city and surrounding areas?
Yes, actually, the Iraqi army now is fighting the militants in Tikrit city and also in whole Salahuddin province. And actually, the Iraqi army is not only advancing in Tikrit, but also he is advancing in the Balad city, and actually he fully controlled Balad city, Al-Ishaqi and Samara, and also he keeps his control on Beji refinery. But the city of Tikrit now is not fully under the control of the Iraqi army because there's still some resistance pockets in the city. And actually, according to Iraqi security officials, they asserted that the city will be totally controlled by the Iraqi army in the next few days. Fatma, I want to mention that today the statement or the announcing that made by ISIL when they announced that they established a caliphate, I asked some people in the capital Baghdad. I asked them about their opinion. They said it might be only a propaganda, and actually they might aim at hiding their failure in Iraq and also in Syria, and they want to intimidate the people. And they want to show that they still have control, they still have the initiative in Iraq, and they can actually establish a caliphate which it can be compared to a state. Logically, according to political experts, they said logically it cannot be happened because if you want to create a system, a government, you need to have voters, international recognition, or consensus by some regional countries. So all these elements that ISIL militants or any terrorist group cannot achieve, not sooner or later.
Yes, and we've heard that the army is carrying out several measures to secure Baghdad. Tell us more about this.
Yes, the Iraqi army actually, he prepared some precaution military plans, and he actually launched some military operation in the outskirts of the city of Baghdad to deprive and to deprive any attack or any potential attack it might be launched by the militants, especially with the high pressure that the Iraqi security forces backed by the Air Force that implement on the militants in Salahuddin and also in Diyala and in Fallujah. So they might be planning to attack Baghdad to ease the pressure on their militants in Salahuddin or in other northern provinces. But the Iraqi army actually deployed several of its members in the capital Baghdad and on the outskirts. And also there's some fighter jets now flying over Baghdad to secure the city from any potential attack. Yes.
All right, thank you for those updates. Mustafa Al-Qattan, our Baghdad correspondent. Food, fuel and water running out in Iraq's second largest city of Mosul, causing thousands to flee ahead of the airstrikes. Many fear will proceed a government counter-offensive to retake cities captured by insurgents earlier this month.
Early on Sunday morning, hundreds began lining up across the Mosul-Erbil highway. Men, children and women stood in the 40 degrees Celsius heat without shade or water in the hope of being allowed to a safe haven. Many of these refugees came from the Christian village of Karakush, 30 kilometers of Iraq's second largest city, Mosul. Settled down in cathedrals and other community centers and halls, the influx of so many people has stretched the local community to its limit with food and water supplies.
A simple tank at the entrance to the building serves as a main source of water.
We're from Karakush. It was heavily bombed. With the water and electricity supply cut out for days, we'll stay here till our village is safe.
When asked about his future plans, this refugee said he was at loss and had no idea. The same scene can be seen in a camp in the country's Diyala province, with more than 1,000 families taking shelter in the city of Khanakin after fleeing fighting near the city of Ba'kuba. Some were immediately fearful for their lives.
I took my children and fled. I couldn't stay there because I am afraid to be killed.
For those Musa refugees without family or friends in Kurdistan, home for now will be the United Nations High Commission on Refugees-run camp, a giant patch of desert, fast filling up with blue and white tents.
Well, infighting between rival militant groups near Syria's border with Iraq is raging in northwestern Syria, only hours after that declaration by ISIS of an transnational Islamic caliphate.
This is yet another incident where innocent civilians are caught in the crossfire. At least 14 people have been killed and over 50 others wounded after several rounds of mortar fire hit the Syrian city of Idlib. In their ongoing attempt to control the provincial capital of northwestern Syria, foreign-backed militants launched a series of attacks targeting the bazaar square, killing scores, including women and children. Further to the east, on Syria's border with Iraq, militants are fighting a war within a war. Heavy clashes were reported between several Syrian militant factions and the Al-Qaeda offshoot of ISIS in the border town of Bukamal. This came only hours after ISIS declared the establishment of a transnational Islamic caliphate. Fighting with the notorious group last week saw several fighters belonging to the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Nusra Front defect and join the ranks of ISIS. According to the so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, over 7,000 people have been killed since January in infighting among foreign-backed militants in northern Syria. While 650 of those are civilians, the number of innocent casualties is expected to rise in the coming weeks as ISIS attempts to gain a greater foothold in the country, sparing no one that gets in their way.
Well, the deteriorating security situation in Iraq is driving up oil prices across the world. Our Cairo correspondent gives us a look now at the impact that the spike in price is having on both the Egyptian economy and its people.
An increase of approximately $10 billion for fuel subsidies will be stipulated in the budget for the 2014-2015 fiscal year to offset the increase in the global price of oil, according to Egypt's Ministry of Petroleum. One barrel of crude oil reached $115 this year, in comparison to last year's $109, which officials attributed to continuing violence in Iraq, adding that this will inevitably lead to more price hikes for imported petroleum products. Some residents have argued that the responsibility should be shared between consumers and the government.
The people should handle the increase on the international market, as the national budget cannot handle this increase. The economy is already struggling.
The worsening political and security situation in Iraq has influenced the price of oil on world markets, and with the Islamic State attempting to push farther into Iraq, many experts are predicting that the cost of oil could increase to around $140 a barrel. A continuation of the current situation in Iraq threatens the entire oil market, since Iraq is considered to be the second largest producer of crude oil in the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries.
Increasing petrol prices would cause a crisis. The people are already struggling to cope with the current price. People are fed up.
So far, the so-called Islamic State has closed Iraq's main oil refinery, but they haven't yet reached the major oil fields in the south, which account for 90% of the country's oil exports. According to analysts, the rates will spike dramatically, especially if Iraq's crude oil export is brought to a complete halt. The continuation of the unrest in Iraq threatens the entire oil market, especially the Egyptian market, and with the already deteriorating economy and the recent increase in oil prices, any increase in subsidies will certainly have a great impact on the recovering economy. Reporting for AEE TV from Cairo, Karim Azzuddin.
And staying in Egypt, where 2 of the country's senior police officers were killed and several others wounded after a bomb they were trying to defuse near the presidential palace in Cairo exploded. The attack came almost a year to the day when the military toppled Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, unleashing an extensive crackdown on his supporters and setting off a deadly militant campaign. The Israelis have confirmed that the 3 Zionist settlers who went missing a few weeks ago in the West Bank have been found dead, accusing Hamas of being behind the killings. However, the resistance group has warned that any Israeli attack will open the gates of hell.
The Israeli entity has declared that occupation forces have found the bodies of 3 Zionist settlers who went missing in the West Bank earlier this month. According to media reports, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called for an urgent security cabinet meeting during which he blamed Hamas for the killings. This as Israeli officials have called for a widespread operation to, quote, eradicate the Palestinian resistance movement. The Zionist regime has accused the resistance group of being behind the abduction. Hamas, for its part, has denied involvement. It has also been quoted warning that an Israeli attack against the Gaza Strip will open the gates of hell. Israeli occupation forces mounted a massive sweep operation through Palestinian towns and villages, mainly in and around the southern West Bank city of Al-Khalil, and detained more than 400 Palestinians, accusing them of being involved. As tensions rise, the United States urged both the Israelis and Palestinians to exercise restraint.
We have, as you noted, been in touch with both sides and have been urging continued security cooperation, that the Israelis and the Palestinians continue to work with one another on that, and we certainly would continue to urge that, in spite of obviously the tragedy and the enormous pain on the ground as a result.
Earlier in the day, an Israeli airstrike killed 1 Palestinian man and wounded 3 others in Gaza. The assault came just hours after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu threatened to expand military attacks against the besieged enclave.
If this fire continues, there are 2 possibilities. Either Hamas stops it as the responsible authority in the area, or we will stop it. I strongly suggest that Hamas take into account the fact that we will not let this firing continue or expand.
עם השקט שהושג בעקבות מבצע עמוד ענן.
Palestinian resistance groups responded to ongoing Israeli attacks with at least 14 rockets and mortar rounds, as Zionist forces launched almost daily operations over the past 2 weeks.
As Ramadan sets in, residents in the Gaza Strip are unlikely to have any respite from the ongoing struggle to survive. This year, the holiest month in the Islamic calendar comes against the backdrop of a faltering economy and the shutdown of supplies via tunnels from Egypt.
Every year, the holiday cheer that normally gets Gazans out on the streets during the holy month of Ramadan loses momentum. This year, Gazans welcomed the holy month with less fanfare, with prices higher than usual as a result of the Israeli blockade and the shutdown of tunnels which are used for supplies deliveries via Egypt.
It's made a difference in the prices. 2 kilos of cheese last year we sold for 13 shekels, and now it's 22. Jarrad cheese we also used to sell for 13, and now it's 18 shekels. The same with jam. The prices have gone sky high. Everything has increased at least by 5 shekels, because now goods are coming from the crossings, not from the tunnels.
When the tunnels were functioning, it would bring in lots of food. Regarding Ramadan, the prices were affordable for everyone. They were somewhat cheap. Everyone could buy them. Now I see the price of an item has increased 7 to 80% since last year.
The holiday period of Ramadan began on Sunday. While traditionally a time for worship, it is also marked by family feasts in the evening at the end of a daily fast from sunrise to sunset.
However, the faltering economy has prevented Gazans in the coastal enclave from getting a taste of the celebrations, further dampened by an escalation in violence.
Well, Libyans have also begun the holy Muslim month of Ramadan with less fanfare this year as they struggle with significant rising food prices following last year's assembly vote marred by violence and a very low turnout.
Aisles jam-packed with shoppers. This is not an unusual scene in the Libyan capital as Islam's holy month of Ramadan got underway. However, the usually festive mood seemed to be missing. According to most, prices have gone through the roof.
In general, prices have started to rise in the holy month of Ramadan, where we notice some prices have almost doubled and we don't know why.
As he bought meat at a butcher's located on the city's chicken street, Ahmed had no idea how to make his month's salary last.
This street is named Chicken Street, and if I want to go and buy what I need with my salary, it finishes while I'm still in the street. If you follow me to the last shop, and if you ask me how much do I have left of my salary, I will say nothing, and I am yet to finish my shopping.
Since the 2011 armed uprising that ousted former strongman Muammar Gaddafi, Libya descended into almost total lawlessness. As security deteriorated considerably, the government has almost no power over the many armed brigades that fought to overthrow Gaddafi and have since carved out their own spheres of influence. The country has since faced a bumpy transition towards democracy, which still seems a long way off from ending years of political turmoil and economic instability.
You're watching Ali Tijah World News, still to come. The Pakistani army kicks off a ground offensive in the Taliban stronghold of North Waziristan. Welcome back to Ali Tijah World News. Here's a reminder of our top stories. ISIS declares an Islamic caliphate and calls on all factions worldwide to pledge their allegiance. Iraqi government troops continue their offensive to retake the city of Tikrit from Islamic State militants. And Hamas warns the Israelis that any attack on Gaza will open the gates of hell after 3 missing Zionist settlers are discovered dead in the West Bank. Ukraine's president has accused pro-Russian rebels in the east of the country of failing to fulfill conditions for peace. Petro Poroshenko made the comments during a phone conversation with the leaders of Russia, Germany and France as he pondered whether to extend a recently declared ceasefire.
Had it not been for the public announcements and official statements, it would have been hard to believe that a ceasefire was currently in place in eastern Ukraine.
What is it, a truce? How can one even call it a truce? Can't Poroshenko and his newly elected government see what is happening, that people are dying?
On Monday, a journalist from the Russian state television was shot dead in eastern Ukraine while reporting in the separatist city of Donetsk. Demanding that perpetrators be punished, Russia's foreign ministry said in a statement that Ukrainian forces clearly do not want a de-escalation of the conflict in the country's east and are obstructing an already fragile truce. Also in the rest of east, Ukrainian forces shelled residential parts of Slavyansk for nearly an hour on Sunday, killing up to 5 people. In another incident, shells were launched over the Russia-Ukraine border into Russia on Saturday, with one severely damaging a border crossing checkpoint in the Rostov region. The situation, however, is predicted to worsen after Ukrainian President Poroshenko declared that after the ceasefire ends, those anti-Kiev separatists who failed to lay down their weapons in eastern Ukraine will be destroyed. Government troops are already being seen moving into the east of the country as fighting flares around the checkpoint city of Slavyansk. Meanwhile, despite protests for peace in the east, in central Kiev, over 1,000 demonstrators led by the Ukrainian Army's Donbass battalion fighters gathered for a rally on Sunday to demand that President Poroshenko end the ceasefire and impose martial law. Meanwhile, on the political front, Germany and France will hold talks with Russia and Ukraine over an EU warning that Russia could face punishing sanctions unless Russian President Vladimir Putin convinces pro-Russian activists Moscow is accused of supporting to suspend their uprising.
Let's now speak to Alina Malinovskaya. She is a Moscow-based journalist. Alina, will the extension of a ceasefire do much, considering that fighting is already taking place in the east?
Well, it is hard to say since the agreements on ceasefire don't seem to have much effect. But during the talks today with the French, German and Ukrainian leaders on the phone, the Russian President Vladimir Putin offered that the checkpoints on the Russian and Ukrainian borders will be monitored by representatives of the Ukrainian border service as well as the OSCE observers for the joint control, so to say, joint control of the border. And this can be taken as another step forward to try to resolve the situation. But meanwhile, the conflict has indeed taken an ugly turn as if we look at the developments from yesterday night, while all sides can be taken guilty of harassing the journalists to some extent, to some degree. It looks like there's a deliberate policy of systematically targeting Russian journalists, and since this conflict began, there's a number of Russian journalists affected, and the score is much higher than, say, the same comparable stage in, say, Syria.
Yes, and the West seems to be threatening sanctions regardless of Moscow's actions. What is the Kremlin planning to do other than appeasement?
Well, this is becoming truly grotesque. Merkel threatens Russia with further sanctions again and again. There's little hope that some of them will be pushed through, because the sanctions require unanimous agreement, taken unanimously in the European Union, while, for example, Austria, which just signed for South Stream, Italy, Cyprus, and 3 or 4 other countries have clearly stated their opposition. And what is the upside? What is the point in constantly repeating the threats? And there's little policy in the threats. This is more of desperation.
Yes, and what about the EU association agreement signed last week? How has that been received by Moscow and eastern Ukraine?
The association agreement does not permit Ukraine to conduct independent economic policy in many respects. So the agreement is a political decision only, and that does not really reflect the interests of the Ukrainian people. There's also another opinion that, for example, today the Russian presidential aide said that Russia should not end does not need to recognize the legitimacy of this agreement between the EU and the Kiev regime. And it should also demand that the agreement does not apply to Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, but this is clearly and obviously firmer than the Moscow's official stance, but still such opinion exists.
Yes, and is there a sense in eastern Ukraine that the Russians came to the rescue of Crimea, but they failed to help them?
Well, though both sides have been accused of violating the ceasefire and tensions remain high, there were massive rallies, massive demonstrations, and several hundred Ukrainian soldiers and activists, they gathered in front of the presidential administration in Kyiv on Sunday to call for an end or to the ceasefire in eastern Ukraine. And many of them are furious over the journalists and anti-government soldiers killed in the attacks. So I believe most of the people are still supporting the Russian side in this desperate situation there.
All right, Moscow-based journalist Alina Malinovskaya, thank you for sharing your thoughts on this. Turkey's ruling party, the AKP, is expected to name Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan as its candidate in the August presidential polls. Taking the presidency would allow Erdogan to extend an extraordinary 11-year period in power, making him the longest-serving leader since the country's modern founder, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. However, the Turkish PM has faced huge protests and a major corruption scandal in the past year, possibly affecting his chances of winning. A Tunisian diplomat and a fellow embassy staffer abducted in Libya earlier this year has been freed by their kidnappers after months in captivity. Tunisia's Prime Minister Mahdi Jouma confirmed their release. The Tunisian Foreign Minister said no details were given on the circumstances of their release. At least 2 people have been killed and 7 others wounded after a bomb ripped through a busy market in the Somali capital, Mogadishu. Although there was no immediate claim of responsibility, Somalia's Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab have carried out a string of similar bombings and have vowed to increase attacks during the fasting month of Ramadan. To Pakistan now, where the army has launched a ground assault in the North Waziristan tribal area, beginning a new phase in its offensive against Taliban militants. However, the ongoing offensive has triggered a massive exodus as thousands of residents have been forced to flee their homes.
Artillery shelling and gunshots are echoing across Miranshah in North Waziristan along the Pakistani-Afghan border as troops moved in this morning after 2 weeks of airstrikes and bombardments of insurgent targets. According to security officials in Miranshah, troops used tanks and armored vehicles for ground movement after 6 hours of artillery shelling, which began before dawn, adding that forces have also taken over the civil hospital in Miranshah and destroyed 4 hideouts. A statement from the military's communications wing confirmed that the assault began after the evacuation of the civil population and infantry troops were carrying out house-to-house searches. Military sources added that 15 militants have been killed so far in the ground attack, while 3 soldiers were wounded in clashes. Since the operation began on June 15th, 376 militants have been killed and 19 have surrendered, while 17 soldiers have also died. The conflict zone is off limits to journalists at the moment, making it impossible to verify the number and identity of those killed. On Saturday, the army said a leading Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan commander was killed, while a prominent Al-Qaeda commander was arrested while trying to flee. The ongoing clashes have forced nearly 500,000 people to flee North Waziristan, namely in the town of Banu, while hundreds more have moved further afield to the towns of Laki Marwat, Karak and Dira Ismail Khan. The exodus has created a huge humanitarian challenge for Pakistan, and there have been complaints and protests at the slow delivery of aid. Experts argue that the dramatic attack on Karachi airport, which killed dozens of people and a sudden bloody end to the peace process, have sparked the military offensive. For now, though, and with the holy month of Ramadan at hand, Muslims in Pakistan and many of those displaced by the fighting face the prospect of spending this sacred time living in makeshift camps with no end to the offensive in sight.
Amid ongoing operations by the Italian Navy, which saw more than 5,000 migrants picked up in the past 48 hours, a fishing boat was discovered with 30 bodies on board. Rescuers had found the bodies stuffed into the hold of a fishing boat from North Africa. A Navy doctor said the migrants had likely died of suffocation. Chinese courts have sentenced 113 people to jail terms ranging from 10 years in life in the restive Xinjiang province over terrorism-related charges. The sentences were handed out last Wednesday by courts in 11 countries and counties and cities. This comes after Beijing vowed to crack down on religious and separatist groups, which it blames for a series of violent attacks in Xinjiang. In an apparent show of its desire for peace, North Korea proposed that the two Koreas halt hostile military activities from later this week.
In an attempt to ease tensions in the Korean peninsula, Pyongyang's highest military body, the National Defense Commission, issued a statement calling for South Korea to halt its hostile military activities.
Let's show all Koreans and the world a resolved decision to completely stop all military hostile acts of pushing the North-South relations to the brink of a war.
Pyongyang also proposed a number of conditions, including the cancellation of South Korea's planned joint military drills with the United States, slated for August, a proposal Seoul is likely to reject.
We demand that the South Korean and U.S. annual military drills be immediately called off. This military drill has been conducted as a defensive and annual exercise, but it is an invasive war practice against us.
The North's reprise suggestion was made before a visit by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Seoul. Meanwhile, China, North Korea's major ally and key aid provider, has long called for an easing of tensions in the region.
We are willing to work together with North Korea and South Korea to push forward the healthy and stable development of the China-South Korea relations and China-North Korea relations, which would be in line with the interests of all three sides and would also benefit regional peace and stability.
Beijing also hoped a meeting between Japanese and North Korean representatives in the Chinese capital later this week will help promote that regional stability.
We hope the relevant meeting between Japan and North Korea can help the two countries to improve relations and be beneficial to regional peace and stability.
But before Pyongyang's call for a de-escalation along the peninsula, it sent a message to its foes that it was still prepared for a confrontation as it launched a second missile test in recent days. Perhaps not surprisingly, those tests were met with criticism from Japan and South Korea.
It is an act that violates the United Nations Security Council resolution, and we have expressed our strong objections. We will continue to collect information while remaining on alert as we collaborate with the United States as well as South Korea to respond appropriately.
Considering the North's growing threat from its nuclear program and missiles, we should make practical countermeasures and frustrate its attempts. We should remind North Korea that it cannot get what it needs with provocations and threats.
Pyongyang usually fires its short-range rockets and ballistic missiles during the South Korea-US drills as a form of protest. North Korea has made similar proposals in the past, but they have quickly fizzled out as tensions between the rivals flared. Now, all eyes will be on the South and its possible response to Pyongyang's offer.
Here's a recap of our top headlines. ISIS declares an Islamic caliphate and calls on all factions worldwide to pledge their allegiance. Iraqi government troops continue their offensive to retake the city of Tikrit from Islamic State militants. And Hamas warns the Israelis that any attack on Gaza will open the gates of hell after 3 missing Zionist settlers are discovered dead in the West Bank. Well, that's all from me and the Al Jazeera News team. Thank you for watching and good night.